Lo que tenemos ahora es la persona encargada de la elaboración de normas a nivel de la Comisión Europea, que es al menos tan importante como nuestro propio Ministerio de Justicia, o en estas materias quizás incluso más. Tenemos el privilegio de tener con nosotros a la profesora María Lissowska, que es Senior Officer de la Dirección General de Justicia y de los Consumidores de la Comisión Europea, que es economista y una reputada profesora de la Warsaw School of Economics, y que nos va a hablar dentro de la medida en la que su cargo, porque actúa como representante de la Comisión, le permite, del tema que nos ocupa hoy. Recuerdo a todo el mundo que el discurso va a ser en inglés, igual que el panel siguiente, que existen aparatitos de traducción simultánea, entonces pues que están a uso de todo el mundo. No dejen de utilizarlos. Sin más, María, tienes la palabra. Thanks very much. Please go ahead.
Okay, first, I hope that the microphone works.
It does.
Okay, so first I would like to thank very much the organizers for an opportunity to speak to you in this fantastic room. I've never been speaking in the room of this quality. And I'm very grateful to Professor Padilla also to make this very informative speech. I have read you many times, never met you. So it is also a privilege for me. So what I'm going to do, we are switching now from the general word of risk assessment to the particular word of retail financial services. Retail meaning for individual consumers, so natural persons, not particular investors. I have to skip a number of slides because my presentation is very long. It was to update you on all the actions that the Commission is now carrying out within the framework of the action plan for retail financial services. So I will skip some of them, but maybe I will introduce a little bit what is that about. This is about the willingness of the Commission to make the retail financial services market less fragmented, meaning to enable people living in Spain to buy financial services from Germany, and, for example, German or I don't know, French providers to sell their products also in Spain. This is a problem because in 2016 we found out that only 7% of services, and I would say mostly payments, not credits, were sold cross-border, meaning that there are some opportunities which are lost, the most probably, and this is the thing that the Commission wishes to address. I'm not going to speak about history. What is important, on 23rd of March this year, the action plan was published, and it covers 12 actions. Maybe I'll go one by one with, let's say, more accent on some of them, less on the others. The first is to lower charges on non-euro transactions. As you know, probably, all the cross-border transactions between euro countries are now at the level of internal transaction fees. And this was due to the regulation from 2009, but for example, from my native country, Poland, to Spain, the charges for cross-border transactions are much higher. So now the effort of the Commission is to see whether there is a possibility to amend this regulation. As you know very well, the process of changing any legislation in the Commission is a very hard process. It takes a long, because it should be assessed whether there is really a necessity and how much it will cost. So the first step was public consultation. Then there is a study which analyzes all the possibilities, and then there will be an impact assessment for the legislative proposal. This is the first of the 12 actions. The next one, which you will be, for example, confronted with if you are going to London and you wish to buy something in pounds. And the merchant says, okay, I will charge you in euros. Whether it is better for you than in pounds or not, you don't know. First, you have right to choose. Second, you should be informed. Usually, you can test it. You can be mystery shoppers. I like very much to be a mystery shopper. For example, I was buying something in Poland 3 days ago. And, we have forgotten to tell you that there was such a possibility. I think that that people who are just serving you somewhere, they don't realize there may be a difference. So this is a very serious thing. And the Commission is trying to see what happens. So what are the practices? And there is a call for tender for mystery shopping. Mystery shopping is that the shoppers, who of course are not real shoppers, but they are people who are hired by the contractor, they go to the shop and they pretend doing, or they actually are doing, they are buying something and they note it was done in such and such way. Okay, and then we wish to know what is the state of the market. So what is proposed, how it is proposed, what are the possibilities for the consumer. And then possibly, this is the term which is used usually in the Commission, there will be an assessment of the necessity and possibility of any action. The actions may be different. It may be just some guidance for the providers. It may be recommendation. It may be something which is legislation. This is always like this in the Commission. There is also the problem of product switching. European consumers very often do not switch products. It was already found for the bank accounts. And why people do not switch bank accounts, even if it may be more favorable for them to use another account? Because it is difficult, because you have to change or your standing orders, yes? For this account, maybe you will have to pay fees to switch to another account. For credits, it is even worse, because the only possibility to switch from one credit to another. So, what is going to happen? Then there will be some study trying to explain from the side of the market how are the practices of the providers, whether there will be any barriers. But what was mentioned already by one of the discussants, what are the behavioral barriers? Would you like to change bank account? As a matter of fact, even if I'm, let's say, theoretically aware of many things, I did not reflect about changing bank account in my life. And why? Probably because of my behavioral barriers. So, how to assess what is the situation of the consumer? Now, maybe as to quality comparison website, because if we wish people to change products, they need to have information. So, there is an activity on comparison websites for financial products. There was already some work about comparison websites in general, mostly, for example, for travel. So, comparison websites enable you to see what are the possibilities for your travel somewhere. And it was already completed, and there is a set of principles how such a fair comparison tool should work according to another legislation, which is Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. But now the problem is how to adapt it. This is also the obligation about Payment Accounts Directive, which is now being implemented, so there is no comparison website, but each and every country, Spain of course also, is obliged to set up fair comparison websites to enable consumers possibly to switch from one account to another. So if Poland will provide such a website, now it is impossible because there is no fully harmonized set of services. I will look into and I will see and I will go to discuss with my bank maybe. So what about financial services in general? Not only comparison websites concerning bank accounts. For consumer credits, it is very important to compare, as you know probably, because there are many features, and the major features is APR, an annual percentage rate of charge, but maybe there are other important features which should be taken into account. So now the work is to identify the practices in other countries. There are, for example, there's a report of UK competition market authority on comparison website for financial services, and there will be identification of websites, and there will be meeting with the providers of those services to convince them to use the principles which will be disclosed. I will skip maybe 2 actions which are not very important for you, because this is about car rentals and car insurance. So I don't think it has so much to do with insolvency, for example. However, there is another action which is fairly important for consumer credit market. This is action 7, which has 2 parts in our optics, which is deeper single market for consumer credits. What are the problems? This market is changing. It was already said by my predecessor in speeches that there are banks and non-banks. Who knows how many they are and what is the market proportion? I can tell you nobody knows. Our previous study, which was published 2014 by the Commission about consumer credit market in Europe, says about 20% of this market are other financial providers not having the standing of banks. I suppose now it may be more, with the entry of fintechs, of different providers who maybe first propose new types of products. You have crowdfunding platforms by which you may have awarded credits. And there are also the problems of registration, authorization, who is the supervisor, to whom to address if there is a problem. We have already cases of legally admitted providers registered in one country, selling products which are not admitted in another country, and now the problem is who supervises them and how to contact those entities. So, what are our thoughts about it? It is first to meet the stakeholders and to understand the barriers to cross-border provision of consumer credit. And what are, for example, we know that some consumers prefer to have their providers. For example, for linguistic reasons, it may be more or less important for some categories of consumers. Younger people usually may prefer, may be easier to address providers from other countries because they know more foreign languages, contrary to elder people. It may be lack of access to information. It may be business unwilling to sell to other countries because there are problems, and you will discuss one of those problems, which is insolvency. So, how to address the problem of recovering debt if there is a problem? How to identify your consumer if the identification number in another country is different? So, we wish first to see what is the problem, and then we will reflect how to approach this problem. But there is another part. May I have some water, please? Because this is of my predecessor. So there is the part of over-indebtedness. We know that the over-indebtedness... So, first problem is there is no definition of over-indebtedness. No standard definition. So our definition is people being systematically in arrears. And we discovered in other study, published also 2 or 3 years ago, that about 10% of European consumers are over-indebted, with major differences between the countries, of course due to financial crisis. So it is not true that this is only the credit being the source of over-indebtedness. However, it is one of major sources. Then we know that low-income people are more vulnerable because their income is small, and because, for example, if they lose their income, there is a disaster. They cannot pay back. And then, coming back to the first part of the same action, what are the providers proposing them rolling credits? So one payday loan, if you cannot pay, another payday loan with higher fees, and so on and so on. So they are going deep in over-indebtedness. Our action will be, so we wish also we wish to exchange some experience concerning debt advice. Debt advice, it is not bankruptcy. Debt advice is to protect a consumer against bankruptcy if possible. The behavioral problem is, and we know about it, consumers do not want to be advised. Because they say, I will do it by myself. I am not so deeply indebted. It is a shame to admit that I need some help. There are cultural features. For example, Scandinavians, they willingly go to debt advice, not for Southern Europeans. We don't know why, but we will try to see from the best practices being exchanged what happens to this business, how it can be provided. And we wish also to see what type of credits and practices are the most detrimental for consumers, because it is not neutral for all the sector of credits, for all the financial sector, that there are some activities which may be detrimental. Okay, next activity, I told you that actions are in some way connected, logically. So there is an action which tries to see what are the particular rules in member states, for example, on top of CCD or of distance marketing of financial services or of mortgage credit directive, which may make it difficult to sell cross-border. This is just the discussion with the member states. Member states in some way have right to fill the gaps which are not filled by the existing European legislation. The problem is to what degree it is difficult for providers to sell cross-border. And the other action, which is better creditworthiness assessment. I have to make some discussion point with the previous speaker. So there is a major difference between credit risk and credit worthiness. Credit risk, of course, it is the assessment to what degree the borrower will not pay back loan. It may be structured in different ways. As Professor Padilla said, for example, the creditor may protect himself against credit risk by taking guarantees. In US, creditors became less sensitive to assessment of credit risk because there was securitization. They were just selling risk outside. So this is not my problem. This is credit risk. Of course, there are different manners to limit credit risk. But our problem here, the problem of Commission, is creditworthiness. Why it is a problem, and a legislative problem also? First, because of over-indebtedness. If 10% of Europeans, so about 40 million, is over-indebted, and a small part of this was caused by unfair lending or lending according to the principles which were not very well thought, so there is a problem. Then the problem is also, I can tell you because I know quite well Consumer Credit Directive, there is Article 8 which says member states shall ensure that creditworthiness is being carried out. Point. So there are no principles. Much more is said in Mortgage Credit Directive, which was probably recently transposed in Spain. There is, for example, an obligation to assess the future income of the consumer and also future expenses, also due to financial obligations, meaning repayment of other credits. So there is much, and also there are guidelines of EBA, of European Banking Authority, which explain much better how this creditworthiness assessment should be carried out for mortgages. But there is, for a while, nothing specific for consumer credit. There is a gap which we try to fill in. There is also a difficulty to assess creditworthiness for cross-border borrowers for two reasons. First, in some member states, there are some principles which do not exist in other member states. So there is no harmonized principles. The second problem is the access to foreign credit databases. In both directives, there is the, not possibility, the right of access to foreign credit databases, both for consumer credits and mortgage credits. This is not said how to do it technically. And there is another data also, the coming into force in May 2018, the regulation on general data protection, which will be very important for access to any credit databases and use of any credit data, past the credit data by the creditors. So what we intend to do, it is to introduce common creditworthiness assessment principles and standards, which will not be very far away from those for mortgage credits, because many consumer credits which are secured by mortgages, they are not different. The difference is guaranteed. So the possibility is that those creditors will be less scrupulous in assessing creditworthiness, but they should apply the rules of EBA. And on this basis, because the principle of general data protection regulation is a minimization of data which is taken by the creditors and proportionality to the objective. So we would like to assess what is the minimum set of data which is really necessary to assess creditworthiness. And here I will not develop the discussion about negative and positive databases, but if you take the principle of expenditures, so please figure out what will be useful for from negative and positive credit databases to assess expenditures of consumers for those needs. Okay, now Action 10 is the most mysterious, I would say, but it may be quite strong. It is fintechs for retail financial services. What is known? What is known that fintechs claim that national legislation blocks their activity. Fintechs are the entities which use advanced information technology, which may be registered as financial providers or, quite frequently, no. The most active they are in the area of payments. So everything which is blockchain and so on is called fintechs. However, so what is the risk of their activity? There are two risks. First, the risk is consumers are very often not protected, and they even don't know what happens in this black box. The other risk is the problem of money laundering, because if it is not controlled, who knows what goes to illegal activities. So it is known, because there was a consultation based on, focus on fintechs, that there is a need of some regulation. And I can tell you that in the beginning of 2018, some action plan, maybe some actions already, will be published by the Commission. but there is a way, a work ongoing. This I will skip because there is very little time now. Digital identity check, but online selling of financial services, the last action. There are many problems in online selling. The first problem is that there are new needs, new possibilities, and also new challenges. The challenge is, for example, transparency, what information we can give on a screen of a smartphone. So it should be maybe adjusted, and maybe some products should not be sold in this way. There is the problem of consent of borrowers to give information to someone. You cannot imagine, but now it is assessed that 60% of all the data gathered are gathered from online transactions. So it is really a huge mass of data, and I don't know whether you realize what the data track you leave when you use your smartphone, sometimes when you use even your car, if you have an app which helps you in some way but also keeps your track. So what we are going to do, we are going to map the providers, because we don't know how many they are, what they are doing, what type of them, whether they are supervised or not, mapping techniques, especially using in advertising, and also assessing the behavior of consumers, how they react to different manners in which they are approached. And this is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much.
Lovely, you've been very much attached to time. Tenemos tiempo para algunas preguntas, 2 o 3 quizás. ¿Algún voluntario? ¿Alguien que quiera preguntar? Adelante. Profesor Padilla.
Just one question regarding comparison sites. I think that one concern that I think that a number of us have with respect to comparison sites in other areas, but also in financial services, is about impartiality and neutrality. I don't think that those comparison sites, out of their own initiative, have necessarily the incentive to be neutral, because one way of funding their sites is actually to charge, and people are going to charge more if they are ranked high, or they're offer first, or presented first. And we have seen that in another area. We have seen the Google case and the fine imposed recently. So to what extent you are considering neutrality obligations when thinking about how to deal and regulate with those comparison sites?
Okay, what I can tell you, we cannot make miracles. For example, we cannot oblige all the member states, because the solution would be to oblige member states to set up publicly financed comparison websites, which is costly. So the half solution, which is proposed to the other websites, and probably, because there is no principles for a while, this is an ongoing work, so probably it will be announced in the first quarter of 2018, of course publicly on the website of the Commission, what we propose. More or less the proposal for the other websites, and I will try to find out where I had the slide. Many actions. So, what are the principles for the Payment Accounts Directive? They should clearly disclose owners. This is the website of such and such. They should show what are the criteria for comparison. The information should be clear, accurate, and up to date. They should include a broad range of accounts. Whether it is sufficient, we don't know. This is half solution. It was negotiated in the Payment Accounts Directive. So no miracles if there will be. We know very well that some websites even show the opinions of the users which are unfair. And this was regulated in the previous activity, for example, authenticity of user reviews. How to do it? At least to exclude false reviews, which are sent by the providers. But of course, this situation would be the best solved by publicly owned websites.
David.
Yep. Thanks very much for the very informative presentation. I had one question regarding the slide on fintech, which first of all, I have to thank you for defining it as a mysterious initiative, because I've been thinking that myself for long, and it's a relief that you also use the same term. My question is I would say less with the initiative itself as it is with its connections with other initiatives, because the Commission not only has an agenda on fintech, it also has an agenda on shadow banking, for example, and it also fintech also cuts across other initiatives such as the online selling of financial services or the cross-border selling of financial services. Those initiatives, in the case of fintech, pose a taxonomical problem, because should those initiatives apply to fintech companies? Not. And should new rules be necessary in those respects to ensure that the field is not basically asphyxiated, but at the same time consumers are protected and are the masters of their own data? So is there any, high-level coordination process envisaged within the Commission to ensure that these initiatives are consistent? Thank you.
Okay. There is, to my mind, no comprehensive definition of fintechs. This is the name of activity. In the action plan on fintechs, which will be published in the beginning of the year, probably January or February, there will be, the most probably, I'm not working directly on this initiative, but as I feel, there will be particular initiatives for groups of fintechs. It may be fintechs making payments. It may be platforms of crowdfunding. It is also fintechs. What I feel in the definition, it is the entities using internet technology. So whether, for example, Facebook providing some information, it may be also considered as a fintech because it provides financial information. Now the problem is who supervises those entities which do not cover the whole field of the activity. According to the definition, if in distance marketing of financial services directive, there is such a directive of 2002 and everybody has forgotten about it. The entities regulated by this directive should cover the whole process of granting a financial service, for example, from advertising to signing a credit. This is quite rare now. This is quite rare as to credits, because usually even non-bank entities wish to sign the contract in person for security reasons, because they wish to see whether this person is alive, has some identity, whether this identity corresponds to the person, and so on. In this case, of course, the provider should be supervised. The other providers which claim, for example, providers of scores, providers of scoring, typical fintechs. There are IT providers working in financial services. Whether they are supervised I suppose most of them know. How they work? Usually they work as subcontractors of someone. From a legal point of view, it is the creditor who takes responsibility for all the intermediaries. For what? For example, there is a judgment of the European Court of Justice saying that this is the creditor who is responsible for verifying all the data, taken into account in granting credit. To what degree the creditor is able to check the scoring mechanism. So it opens really a big field of work. I'm not a specialist in fintechs. I just know some little pieces, and I think that more will be said in this action plan, which will be published in the beginning of the year. But for a while, really no details are provided.
Bueno, yo tendría también una pregunta, pero me la voy a callar porque estamos con bastante retraso, con lo cual agradecemos mucho a la ponente su participación y la atención de la gente. Muchas gracias.